In the Han Dynasty, three heroes made an oath in the Peach Garden, a pact of sworn brotherhood to end corruption and continue the reign of the Han: Liu Bei, Guan Yu, Zhang Fei. Three men of outstanding appearances and virtue, armed with some of China's most legendary weapons, most notably the green dragon crescent blade of Guan Yu and the serpent spear of Zhang Fei. Each distinct in its appearance, unmistakable and imposing, just as the men who wielded them. However, these two weapons did not exist in the Han Dynasty. The real Guan Yu and the real Zhang Fei never used anything like this. So where did these weapons originate? And more importantly, what did the real Guan Yu and the real Zhang Fei use in battle? All of these we'll explore in today's episode of Han Dynasty Weapons. So first off, let's talk about why we have these weapons. The wide, curved blade with the dragon's claw that we know so well as the green dragon crescent blade of Guan Yu, and the wavy snake-like spear that we know for Zhang Fei. Well, these came out more in a later time when the novel, The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, was written, and it was due to what weapons were existing at that time. In the novel itself, the weapons are actually only listed as green dragon saber and snake or serpent spear. So there's really no description of what the weapons looked like. Artists kind of had a little bit of liberty to show a more extraordinary weapon by making some of the dimensions and the sizes a little bit bigger, and they did base it off of weapons that were available at that time in the Song Dynasty. One cool thing I'd like to note is that at this point in Chinese history, many of the blades from the Song Dynasty and preceding the Song Dynasty were actually very straight-backed blades. So you can see this in the Zhanma Dao of the Tang Dynasty, later on in the Song Dynasty, very straight-bladed swords, even in the Dao shape from the Tang Dynasty, and then later on in the Song Dynasty. Curved blades were more commonly seen outside of China in the northern tribes and kingdoms like Liao. Now, it's not hard to take a look at the Liao Dao and speculate that this could have been integrated into the mainstream Chinese weaponry and eventually found its way on a long pole and became the spring and autumn sword, or the green dragon crescent blade that we know and love so well. So if these weren't their weapons, what did Guan Yu and Zhang Fei actually use? Well, unfortunately, we can't say for certain. We can only assume based on what weapons were available at the time and what was mentioned in the historical texts. And on top of that, the historical texts had a written vernacular that simplified everything. And we've seen this in the case of the ji, or the halberd, where there's 4 different configurations of the halberd, but it's only mentioned as a single thing: halberd, 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 halberd. Now, we can narrow it down just a little bit more for Guan Yu and Zhang Fei. We do know that they were both generals and that they fought on horseback. So what this means is they had exceptional skill, which we already knew, but being on horseback, they most likely favored polearm weapons. Now in the Han Dynasty, there were 4 major polearm weapons: Qiang, Ji, Sha, and Pi. Now in the case of Guan Yu, it was mentioned that he used his saber, and if he was on horseback, it could have been a long cavalry saber just like this one, but this would have been a side weapon. One of the main weapons being on horseback would have been a polearm. Now, we already know what a ji is, and since the historical texts never mention Guan Yu or Zhang Fei ever really using a halberd, we can more or less rule that one out. However, it gets a little more complicated from here. You see, with the other polearms, unless you know exactly what a pi, a sha, or a qiang is, you could label all 3 of them as spear. Qiang is the term for a spear, and as you can see, it fits the bill. It's a long pole with a sharp-bladed tip at the end. Now let's look at the pi, which is also a long pole with a sharp blade at the end. But if you notice, the blade almost looks like a short Bronze Age sword, wide and robust and a small crossguard at the base. Although you may have never heard of it, a Han Dynasty inventory list from 13 BC shows that there were nearly 9 times as many pi than Qiang spears on hand. With a huge number like that, it was most likely used by infantry soldiers and not something that the higher ranking officers would have been using. So that leads us to the sha, which is described in English as a sword staff and is likened to the Western polearm, the partisan. It is a long pole with a blade, a sword-length blade attached to the end, and it usually has a very wide crossguard, which is very unique to the weapons of the time. The crossguard had forward points which could be used for trapping techniques as well as piercing, similar to a trident. Because of the higher cost and the amount of time it took to produce, the sha was reserved for skilled warriors, which were typically high-ranking officers. However, decorative sha became a symbol of status and were often commissioned by the elite and wealthy to display their posterity. So going back to our heroes, Guan Yu and Zhang Fei, they were elite heroes that had very good fighting skills. They were on horseback and most likely used polearms. It's safe to say that they could very well have used the sha, or at least knew how to use the sha. I mean, the weapon itself and the techniques that you would use with this fit many of the descriptions that we find in the ancient texts. However, you still have to take that with a grain of salt because a lot of the text got changed and molded over time, especially with the introduction of the novel, The Romance of the Three Kingdoms. But historically speaking, these would be more accurate weapons for Guan Yu and Zhang Fei than the weapons that we most commonly associate them with. So it goes without saying, I personally believe that this could have been the weapon that both Guan Yu and Zhang Fei used back in the Three Kingdoms era. Now, there's still a good chance that Zhang Fei used just a regular spear, considering his affinity to plunge it into his enemies, but as you can see, these weapons can absolutely plunge into enemies as well. Now, does this affect my feelings on the weapons that we know and we've attributed to Guan Yu and Zhang Fei? No. In fact, I think that it's important that we keep using those weapons in regards to Chinese opera, in regards to the media, the movies, the video games, all of that, because the stories have been built up so much and they've changed and they've kind of created their own cultural identity. So I don't think it's something that we need to delete or correct. However, in a historical sense, it is important to know what weapons they would have used, and when it comes to drawings or diagrams or movies, if they want to be more historically accurate, this is something that you should be seeing in reference to those two. Now, of course, this just comes down to my thoughts. I'm just a martial artist, but I would love to hear what you guys think. Let me know what you think about how we should move forward with weapons that we're finding out actually existed in the time as compared to the weapons that we've associated with these heroes culturally over the years. And also let me know, if you have one of these, what are your feelings on it? Do you prefer the longer blade of the classic sha, or do you prefer the bat wing shape or the shorter blade of the bat wing sha? These are really unique weapons. I've had a lot of fun working with them, and you can expect to see videos of these in forms work and in cutting. So let me know your thoughts. Hopefully you learned something from this video. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, all of those things, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.
Bye.